The story of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald begins not on a stormy night, but in an age of industrial triumph. The 1950s were booming years for American steel. Cities like Detroit, Toledo, and Cleveland roared with factories that devoured iron ore to build automobiles, bridges, and skyscrapers. The Great Lakes, those vast inland seas, were the lifeline for this industry. Every season, freighters carried millions of tons of ore from the iron ranges of Minnesota to the furnaces of the Midwest. In this race for size, speed, and efficiency, one company decided to build a ship that would outshine all others. That company was the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company of Milwaukee. Oddly enough, an insurance company was about to finance the largest freighter the Great Lakes had ever seen. Their goal was simple: create a ship so massive and efficient that it could dominate the iron trade for decades. After months of planning, contracts were signed with Great Lakes Engineering Works, a renowned shipbuilder based in River Rouge, Michigan. The order called for a vessel unlike any before it, a floating giant nearly 2 football fields long, capable of carrying more cargo than any other ship on the lakes. Construction began in 1957. Workers laid down an enormous keel, then slowly raised steel plates into a sleek, powerful hull. Day by day, the ship took shape, long, lean, and elegant despite her brute strength. Measuring 729 feet in length with a beam of 75 feet and a depth of 39 feet, she would dwarf most of her contemporaries. Her cargo holds were designed to carry more than 26,000 tons of taconite pellets, the processed form of iron ore. Her powerful diesel engines could push her through storms at more than 16 miles per hour, a remarkable speed for a freighter of such size. The ship's namesake was Edmund Fitzgerald, the chairman of Northwestern Mutual. Though he was a businessman and not a sailor, Fitzgerald loved the Great Lakes and followed the ship's construction closely. He insisted that this vessel should not only be the largest, but also the most beautiful. Unlike many freighters, which were purely functional, the new ship would feature touches of luxury. The crew quarters were spacious and well-appointed. The captain's lounge boasted mahogany paneling and plush carpeting. Passengers, yes, she would carry a few special guests on some voyages, could enjoy private staterooms and a dining saloon with large picture windows looking out over the endless water. By June 1958, the ship was ready for her grand debut. Thousands of spectators lined the shore of the River Rouge to witness the launch. A brass band played as dignitaries gathered on a decorated platform. When the final signal was given, the massive hull slid majestically down the ways and into the Detroit River with a thunderous splash. As the giant settled into the water, cheers erupted. She was officially christened the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, and almost immediately, she captured the imagination of Great Lakes sailors and enthusiasts. From her first voyage, the Fitzgerald proved she was more than just a showpiece. Under the command of seasoned captains, she set speed records and carried unprecedented loads of iron ore between Superior, Wisconsin, and the steel mills of eastern ports. Crowds gathered at ports and along the Sulaks just to catch a glimpse of her. Newspapers called her the pride of the American side, a nickname that stuck. Sailors who worked aboard her spoke of her strength, her grace, and her uncanny ability to cut through heavy seas with a smooth, confident motion. One man who would come to know the Fitzgerald better than most was Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran mariner with nearly 40 years on the lakes. McSorley joined the company in the early 1970s and quickly earned a reputation as a calm, capable leader. He respected the lake but never feared it, guiding the Fitzgerald through countless storms and treacherous passages. Crew members admired his steady hand and quiet confidence. Under his command, the Fitzgerald developed a near-legendary record of reliability. But Lake Superior is not easily impressed. Sailors have long called it the most unpredictable of the Great Lakes, a place where weather can change in minutes and waves can build higher than a 3-story building. Old-timers spoke of the Witch of November, a nickname for the sudden gales that often sweep across the lake late in the shipping season. Even the largest freighters are vulnerable to her icy breath. Though the Edmund Fitzgerald seemed invincible, those who worked her decks knew that the lake always had the final word. Through the 1960s and early 1970s, the Fitzgerald became a fixture of the Great Lakes. Children pressed their faces against car windows as their parents pointed out the mighty ship gliding across the horizon. Radio operators often tuned in when the Fitzgerald called in her positions, marveling at the crisp discipline of her crew. There was a quiet pride in the way she carried herself, as if the steel giant understood she was something special. As 1975 approached, the Fitzgerald remained the flagship of the Great Lakes Fleet, but she was no longer alone at the top. Other shipping companies had begun to build new freighters of similar size, and competition was fierce. The season of 1975 promised to be another profitable year, with iron ore in high demand and steel mills running at full capacity. For Captain McSorley and his crew of 29, it was business as usual. They had made dozens of runs between Superior and Detroit, each one a routine test of seamanship, timing, and endurance. No one aboard could have guessed that their next trip would be the one history would never forget. The chill of late autumn settled heavily over the port of Superior, Wisconsin, on the morning of Sunday, November 9th, 1975. Winter's grip was only weeks away, but the shipping season still had a few precious days left. For the men of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald, this meant one final lucrative run before ice would close the lakes. The dockside air carried a sharp bite, mingling with the metallic scent of iron pellets and diesel fumes. It was the kind of cold that promised change, a stillness before the brewing of something far more dangerous. Inside the loading facility at the Burlington Northern Ore Dock, thousands of tons of taconite pellets thundered down giant chutes into the cavernous holds of the Fitzgerald. Each iron pellet was no larger than a marble, but together they formed a cargo of over 26,000 tons, enough to feed the blast furnaces of Detroit for weeks. Crew members moved briskly across the deck, inspecting hatch covers and securing equipment. The sound of clanging steel echoed against the frozen shoreline. Every man understood the importance of this final trip. The lakes could be treacherous in November, but the Fitzgerald had weathered many storms before. At the heart of the operation stood Captain Ernest McSorley, a man whose steady presence inspired quiet confidence. At 63, McSorley was nearing the end of a long career on the Great Lakes. Tall and silver-haired, with calm eyes that seemed to read the moods of the water, he was known for his cool judgment in dangerous weather. This was to be his last shipping season before retirement. One more run across Superior, one more successful delivery to Detroit, and he could leave the lakes with his reputation untarnished. To the crew, McSorley was a captain who never panicked, no matter how violent the storm. As the final loads of taconite settled into the Fitzgerald's vast cargo holds, the ship's powerful engines rumbled to life. The clock neared 2:15 p.m. when McSorley gave the order to cast off. With a low, resonant blast of her horn, the pride of the American side eased away from the dock. Dock workers waved gloved hands in the frigid air as the 729-foot freighter slid gracefully into the shipping lane, her black hull gleaming beneath the pale November sun. Behind her, another ship prepared to follow, the Arthur M. Anderson, commanded by Captain Jesse Cooper. Slightly smaller but equally seasoned, the Anderson would serve as both companion and, later, witness to history. On the surface, the conditions looked manageable. The skies were a dull, cold gray. A light wind stirred ripples across the harbor. But beyond the relative shelter of Superior Bay, meteorologists were already issuing warnings. A low-pressure system was racing out of the northern plains, pulling frigid air across the Great Lakes. The National Weather Service predicted increasing winds and building seas by nightfall. November storms were nothing new, but sailors knew the lake could turn vicious with little notice. As the Fitzgerald cleared the harbor and entered open water, crew members prepared for the journey ahead. The 200-mile route across Lake Superior to Whitefish Bay would normally take less than a day. But in worsening weather, timing was unpredictable. Engineers checked the massive diesel engines, making sure the vibrations stayed within normal limits. Deckhands inspected the 21 cargo hatches, ensuring that each cover was sealed tight against the coming waves. In the galley, cooks secured pots and utensils, anticipating the heavy roll of the ship. The men aboard numbered 29, from seasoned sailors to younger deckhands eager to prove themselves. They came from ports all around the Great Lakes: Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota. For them, life at sea meant long hours, bitter cold, and the constant challenge of navigating some of the most unpredictable waters in the world. Yet the camaraderie of the crew, the rhythm of the work, and the pride of serving aboard the finest freighter on the lakes gave the job a unique satisfaction. As the Fitzgerald gained speed, the vastness of Lake Superior opened before her. Even in calm weather, Superior's sheer scale is humbling, over 350 miles long and deeper than 1,300 feet in places. Its cold, fresh water has a reputation for swallowing ships without a trace. Old-timers spoke of the Witch of November, a nickname for the savage storms that often strike during the final shipping weeks of the year. McSorley knew these waters as well as any man alive, and he remained outwardly confident. Yet he was too experienced to underestimate the lake's power. Throughout the afternoon, the National Weather Service updated its bulletins. Winds from the southwest were expected to increase to gale force, over 34 knots, by evening. Squalls and snow were predicted to reduce visibility to near zero. The Fitzgerald's radio crackled with these warnings, but Captain McSorley pressed on. It was not recklessness. It was the reality of Great Lakes shipping. Contracts had to be fulfilled. Cargo had to reach the steel mills before the season closed. Every captain knew the dance between profit and peril. As dusk approached, the first real gust swept across the deck, carrying flecks of icy spray. The temperature dropped sharply. Crew members donned heavier jackets and tightened their hoods as they worked the lines. The Fitzgerald's bow rose and fell with a slow, powerful rhythm, cutting through the growing waves with the confidence of a veteran. To the men on deck, it was just another November night on the lake. By nightfall, the Fitzgerald and the Anderson were running in tandem, their lights glowing faintly in the mist. The two ships maintained regular radio contact, exchanging updates on speed, course, and weather. The relationship between them would prove critical in the hours ahead, as the storm intensified beyond anyone's expectations. For now, though, the routine of a Great Lakes crossing continued. Charts checked, compasses aligned, engines humming in a steady heartbeat deep within the steel hull. Above, the sky darkened into a low, menacing ceiling. Far to the northwest, hidden beyond the horizon, the storm gathered strength, its icy winds twisting into the first signs of a gale. The men aboard the Edmund Fitzgerald went about their duties unaware that this ordinary run was about to enter legend. They had left port as they had dozens of times before, trusting their ship and their captain. Yet somewhere in the swirling clouds ahead, the forces of nature were preparing a night that no sailor could truly imagine. Night fell quickly over the endless expanse of Lake Superior, swallowing the Edmund Fitzgerald in a cloak of black water and steel-gray sky. The temperature dropped with a sudden, almost violent urgency. By the time midnight passed and Monday, November 10th, 1975 began, the storm that meteorologists had tracked for hours had swollen into a full-fledged monster. Sailors on the Great Lakes had a name for storms like this: the Witch of November. And tonight, she was wide awake. The first signs of her arrival came in the early hours of the morning. The barometer aboard the Fitzgerald began to sink, slowly at first, then with alarming speed. Deckhands, accustomed to the lake's moods, exchanged wary glances as the numbers kept dropping. In the wheelhouse, Captain Ernest McSorley monitored the instruments with his trademark calm. He had sailed through many November gales before, but the rapidly falling pressure told a story every Great Lakes mariner understood. A deep low-pressure system was bearing down on them, dragging fierce winds and icy snow across hundreds of miles of open water. By dawn, the ship was already facing the storm's first serious assault. Winds screamed across the deck at 40 to 45 knots, driving sheets of freezing spray that clung to every surface. Ice began to form on the railings, the winches, and the massive hatch covers that sealed the cargo holds. Crew members chipped at the growing crust, knowing that too much ice could throw off the ship's balance. Waves rose to 15 feet, slamming into the Fitzgerald's broad bow with bone-rattling force. Each time a crest hit, tons of water thundered across the deck before draining away through the scuppers. The ship's hull groaned in protest but held steady, slicing through the rising seas like a knife. To the west, the Arthur M. Anderson, following several miles behind, felt the same fury. Captain Jesse Cooper maintained regular radio contact with the Fitzgerald, exchanging updates on conditions. Early in the morning, McSorley's voice remained steady, his reports professional. He acknowledged the worsening weather but gave no indication of alarm. The Fitzgerald's powerful engines still drove her at a respectable speed, and the crew worked methodically to keep the ship on course toward Whitefish Bay, the sheltered inlet that promised safety. But the Witch of November was only beginning her attack. By mid-morning, the storm intensified dramatically. Winds roared past 50 knots, gusting higher with sudden violent bursts. Waves climbed toward 25 feet, some curling into steep, breaking walls of water that crashed down on the deck with terrifying force. Veteran sailors aboard the Anderson later described seas unlike anything they had witnessed in years of service. waves that seemed to come from every direction, each one threatening to twist the massive freighters sideways and capsize them. The Fitzgerald's crew fought back with skill and discipline. Engineers monitored the powerful diesel engines in the thundering heart of the ship, adjusting throttle settings to keep the propeller biting into the turbulent water. On deck, men checked mooring lines and secured loose gear, bracing themselves against the spray that froze instantly on contact. Inside the wheelhouse, Captain McSorley and his officers plotted their course with grim determination. They aimed to reach the protective waters of Whitefish Bay before nightfall, but the storm's growing strength made every mile a battle. The radio crackled with updated forecasts that offered no comfort. The National Weather Service issued a storm warning for all of Lake Superior, predicting sustained winds of 50 to 60 knots and waves exceeding 30 feet. Snow squalls would reduce visibility to near zero. It was, in every sense, a classic November gale, the kind of tempest immortalized in the songs and stories of Great Lakes sailors. Ships caught in such storms had vanished without a trace before, and every mariner knew the danger. By early afternoon, the Fitzgerald's radar began to flicker and fail. Icy spray coated the antennas, and violent pitching made the sensitive equipment unreliable. Without radar, McSorley had to rely on compass bearings, visual sightings, and the Andersons' reports to track their position. The loss of radar meant they were essentially blind in a whiteout, navigating a vast, angry sea with only their charts and experience to guide them. Still, McSorley's voice over the radio remained controlled. He acknowledged heavy seas and topside damage, but reported that the ship was holding her own. Out on deck, the storm displayed its raw power in terrifying ways. Waves rose like moving mountains, their dark green faces streaked with foamy white caps. Some came in sudden sets of three, a phenomenon sailors called the Three Sisters. The first wave would lift the ship high, the second would slam into her while she struggled to recover, and the third would crash down with overwhelming force, burying the deck in a solid wall of water. Each series tested the Fitzgerald's immense hull, bending steel plates and sending shudders through the entire structure. The crew could feel the strain in every vibration of the deck beneath their boots. Hatch covers groaned under the weight of water. Ventilators and deck fittings were ripped loose and carried away by the wind. Ice continued to thicken despite constant efforts to chip it away, adding dangerous weight high above the waterline and increasing the risk of a fatal list. Yet the men pressed on, driven by duty and the knowledge that survival depended on relentless work. Inside the warm glow of the wheelhouse, the world was reduced to a few glowing instruments, a compass card, and the muffled roar of the storm outside. The horizon had disappeared entirely, replaced by a swirling chaos of snow and spindrift. Visibility dropped to mere yards. The lake and sky merged into a single churning gray void. Captain McSorley knew they were racing against time. Every hour the storm grew stronger. Every mile left to Whitefish Bay felt longer than the last. As dusk approached, the Witch of November showed no sign of mercy. Instead, the storm seemed to draw strength from the darkness, howling across the lake with an almost supernatural fury. Waves now towered near 35 feet, higher than a 3-story building. Some crashed over the Fitzgerald S-bow with enough force to send shivers through the massive steel frame. In the engine room, the vibration of the propeller echoed like distant thunder. Men tightened their grip on railings and prayed silently as the ship rolled and shuddered in the relentless onslaught. This was the nightmarish reality of a Great Lakes gale, where water and wind conspired to test the limits of human endurance and engineering strength. The Edmund Fitzgerald, once a proud symbol of industrial might, was now a lone steel island battling the raw, unyielding power of nature. The Witch of November had fully awakened, and the outcome of her fury remained frighteningly uncertain. By the time darkness settled over Lake Superior, the Edmund Fitzgerald was locked in a fight for survival. The storm had matured into a monster of terrifying proportions, and the mighty freighter, once the pride of the Great Lakes fleet, was now a battered, ice-coated fortress groaning under the strain of wind and water. Captain Ernest McSorley, a veteran of countless gales, kept his eyes fixed on the compass and listened intently to the endless roar of the wind. The ship's massive steel hull vibrated with every impact of the waves, each shudder a chilling reminder of the power they faced. The crew, exhausted but alert, worked in silence. Every man aboard knew that when equipment began to fail in a storm like this, The line between survival and disaster could be razor thin. A sudden blow, shortly after 7 p.m., a heavy series of waves slammed into the Fitzgerald's starboard side, sending a shiver through the entire ship. Deep below in the cargo holds, the lash of water reverberated like distant thunder. In the engine room, gauges flickered and pipes rattled against their clamps. A crewman reported a sudden list, a slight but unmistakable tilt to the port side. Ice buildup had already added dangerous weight above deck, but this felt different. It was as though something deeper in the ship had shifted. Minutes later, a call came to the wheelhouse. Radar failure. The storm's relentless spray and freezing temperatures had taken their toll. The Fitzgerald's primary radar unit went dark, leaving only the backup set, which was also struggling under the icy assault. Without reliable radar, the ship was nearly blind in the blinding snow. Navigation now depended solely on compass bearings and the Edmund Fitzgerald's last lifeline, the Arthur M. Anderson still trailing miles behind. McSorley radioed the Anderson to report the loss of radar. His voice remained calm, but those listening could hear the strain beneath his steady tone. The Anderson agreed to provide radar-assisted navigation, relaying position updates and course corrections over the crackling radio waves. It was a dangerous dance, one ship acting as the eyes of another in a storm where even the smallest error could mean disaster. Leaks and alarms. Not long after the radar failure, another report reached the captain. Hatch cover damage. Somewhere along the 729-foot deck, the immense steel covers that sealed the cargo holds had been battered by waves powerful enough to bend locking clamps and break seals. Water from the angry lake was seeping into the holds, slowly but steadily. For a freighter carrying more than 26,000 tons of taconite iron ore pellets, this was a nightmare scenario. Even a small leak could allow tons of water to slosh among the heavy cargo, destabilizing the ship's balance. The crew scrambled to check the hatches, but the deck was a death trap. Waves exploded across the steel expanse with each roll of the ship, and the frozen spray turned every surface into slick glass. Going outside meant risking life and limb. They did what they could from inside, trusting that the reinforced covers would hold. McSorley reported the damage to the Coast Guard and the Anderson. His words were measured. "We are taking on water, but we're holding our own." To seasoned sailors, that phrase carried a weight of unspoken urgency. It meant the ship was in trouble, but the captain believed, at least for now, that they could stay afloat. The battle inside below decks, the crew worked with grim efficiency. Pumps roared to life as engineers fought to keep the ballast tanks and bilges clear of rising water. The Fitzgerald was equipped with powerful electric pumps, but the storm made their job nearly impossible. Each massive wave sent thousands of gallons cascading across the deck, and any water that entered the holds added to the ship's growing list. The engine room trembled under the combined forces of the storm and the pounding propeller. Men shouted over the deafening hum of machinery, relaying pressure readings and pump levels. They knew that if the pumps failed, or if the water gained too much ground, the Fitzgerald could lose buoyancy faster than anyone could react. Above, in the wheelhouse, McSorley and his officers monitored the ship's behavior with sharp, trained eyes. They felt every roll, every pitch, every subtle change in the ship's rhythm. A seasoned captain can often sense danger before the instruments show it, and McSorley had spent a lifetime reading the moods of ships in storms. He ordered course adjustments to take the waves at a safer angle, steering toward the relative shelter of Whitefish Bay. But the storm's chaotic seas made even the simplest maneuver treacherous. Communication under siege. The radio became the Fitzgerald's lifeline. Every few minutes, the Anderson called in updates, providing bearings and echoing warnings about worsening conditions. The Coast Guard, already stretched thin by multiple distress calls across the lake, monitored the conversation with growing concern. Reports of 30 to 35-foot waves and winds exceeding 60 knots painted a terrifying picture. At 7:10 p.m., McSorley made a transmission that would later echo in maritime history. Calm but clipped, he reported, "We are holding our own." Those 5 words, simple, steady, and understated, masked the chaos unfolding aboard the ship. It was the voice of a captain doing everything possible to keep his crew focused, to keep fear at bay, and to buy time against a storm that showed no mercy. The lake tightens its grip. As night deepened, visibility shrank to almost nothing. Snow squalls raged across the lake, turning the world outside the Fitzgerald into a black and white blur of ice and spray. The ship's running lights glowed faintly against the storm, but even they were often swallowed by the darkness. From the Anderson, Captain Jesse Cooper occasionally caught fleeting glimpses of the Fitzgerald through the blizzard, a ghostly silhouette rising and falling against walls of water. Each sighting was brief and unsettling, a reminder of how small even a giant freighter appeared in the grip of Superior's fury. Inside the Fitzgerald, fatigue set in. Men clung to handrails as the ship rolled violently, their bodies aching from hours of unrelenting tension. The deck above thundered with each impact of the waves, and every creak of metal carried the unspoken question, how much more can the ship endure? An uncertain future. By 7:30 p.m., the Fitzgerald was a wounded Titan battling a merciless enemy. The loss of radar, the leaking hatches, the relentless waves, all combined to push the freighter toward the limits of survival. Yet through it all, McSorley maintained the steady professionalism for which he was known. His final updates betrayed no panic, no despair, only the controlled determination of a captain who refused to give up the fight. The storm howled louder than ever, but the Edmund Fitzgerald pressed on, inching toward Whitefish Bay. No one aboard could know that these would be some of their last moments. The Witch of November had not yet played her final card. The systems were failing, the lake was rising, and the night still held deadly secrets.
The night of November 10th, 1975, had become an endless nightmare. The Edmund Fitzgerald was a wounded giant crawling through a lake that seemed determined to claim her. The radar was gone, the deck was iced over, and water continued to seep into the holds. Yet the freighter pressed forward, her engines still thundering, her crew still battling. Captain Ernest McSorley knew the stakes. Whitefish Bay Safe Harbor lay only a few dozen miles ahead, but each mile might as well have been an ocean. The gale force winds and mountainous waves were not easing. They were building as if the lake itself were tightening its grip. Time was running out, and everyone aboard sensed it. A ghost on the horizon far behind, the Arthur M. Anderson kept its lonely vigil. Captain Jesse Cooper and his crew could see almost nothing through the driving snow, but every few minutes they caught a faint return on radar or a fleeting glimpse of the Fitzgerald S-Light's tiny sparks of life in a world consumed by black water and white spray. Each sighting felt like a promise that the two ships were still connected, still enduring. But as the hours dragged on, even these brief contacts became rarer. The Fitzgerald was slipping deeper into the storm's shadow, and the Anderson's crew knew that once those lights disappeared for good, the giant freighter would be truly alone. Static and silence. At 7:00 p.m., McSorley's voice came over the radio, crisp and controlled despite the chaos around him. "We are holding our own." It was a phrase loaded with meaning. To the untrained ear, it sounded calm, almost routine. But to seasoned sailors, it carried a quiet urgency. It meant they were still afloat, but only just. It meant the ship was fighting to stay level, that pumps were running, that every man aboard was focused on survival. Minutes passed, the storm grew louder. Then, at 7:10 p.m., another call crackled across the radio waves. McSorley reported that the Fitzgerald had lost both radars entirely and was now navigating blind. He asked the Anderson to continue providing bearings. Cooper acknowledged, his own voice tight with concern. There was no false bravado now, only the sober professionalism of two captains trying to outwit a lake determined to kill them. The last contact at 7:15 p.m., the Anderson called again, checking on the Fitzgerald's progress. Through the hiss of static came McSorley's final words. "We are holding our own." No distress call, no panic. Just the same steady reportant echo of the earlier transmission. Those 5 words would be the last anyone would ever hear from the Edmund Fitzgerald. Cooper listened carefully, waiting for more, but the line went dead. He tried again. No answer. Perhaps the signal was lost in the storm, he thought. Perhaps the Fitzgerald's radio had iced over. He tried again and again, his calls swallowed by the storm's static. The silence stretched on, heavy and unsettling. The vanishing outside, the lake continued its assault. Giant rollers pounded the Anderson as she pressed onward, her crew straining to keep course. Cooper scanned the horizon for the Fitzgerald's lights. There was nothing, only darkness and blinding snow. Minutes later, he ordered a radar sweep. The screen returned only the faint echoes of distant waves. The Edmund Fitzgerald was gone. The Anderson's crew exchanged uneasy glances. It was not uncommon for ships to disappear temporarily in heavy seas, their radar signatures obscured by water or snow. But this felt different. The Fitzgerald had been there and then. In an instant, she wasn't. The grim realization by 7:45 p.m., hope began to wane. The Anderson continued to call over the radio, each unanswered transmission carrying a little more dread. Captain Cooper contacted the Coast Guard to report the situation. The reply was cautious. Storm conditions made it difficult to mount an immediate search. Perhaps the Fitzgerald had simply lost power and was drifting. Perhaps she would emerge once the storm eased. But Cooper knew the lake's reputation. He had seen ships vanish before. Lake Superior was deep, cold, and merciless. If the Fitzgerald had gone down, it would have happened quickly, too quickly for a distress call. Too quickly for anyone to react. Whitefish Bay. As the Anderson neared Whitefish Bay, the crew took small comfort in the relative shelter of the inlet. The winds eased slightly. The waves no longer towered like buildings, but the relief was hollow. Somewhere behind them, in the raging blackness of the open lake, the Edmund Fitzgerald was missing and every man aboard likely gone. The Coast Guard launched search efforts as soon as conditions allowed. Helicopters scoured the lake, their spotlights cutting across the rolling waves. Other freighters joined the hunt, their crews peering into the endless dark. But as the night wore on, it became tragically clear the great freighter had vanished without a trace. An unanswered mystery, the most haunting detail was the speed of the disaster. The Fitzgerald had sent no SOS, no mayday, no frantic call for help. One moment she was reporting that she was holding her own, and within minutes, perhaps even seconds, she was gone. Theories abound. Some believe a massive rogue wave struck, overwhelming the weakened hatches and flooding the holds in an instant. Others suspect a structural failure, the immense stress of the storm finally snapping steel like a twig. Still, others think the shifting cargo of taconite pellets may have destabilized the ship, causing her to plunge beneath the waves without warning. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. 29 men, experienced sailors all, were lost to the icy depths of Lake Superior. Their final moments remain shrouded in mystery, their voices silenced by the Witch of November, the echo of a last call. For those who listen to the recordings of that final transmission, the words "we are holding our own" carry a haunting resonance. They are a Captain S last stand against impossible odds, a message of calm in the face of certain doom. McSorley never begged for help, never betrayed fear. He spoke as he had sailed, steady, controlled, determined to the very end. Today, those words serve as both a comfort and a warning. They remind us of the strength of the human spirit, but also of the unforgiving power of the Great Lakes. No matter how advanced the technology, no matter how skilled the crew, nature always has the final word.
The clock moved past 8 p.m. on November 10, 1975, and the icy winds over Lake Superior showed no sign of mercy. In the cozy homes of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, families huddled inside, listening to weather reports that described a storm unlike anything seen in years. But out on the lake, aboard the Arthur M. Anderson, a grim reality had already settled in. The Edmund Fitzgerald was gone. Captain Jesse Cooper stood in his wheelhouse, staring at the dark void where the Fitzgerald's lights should have been. He replayed the last radio call in his mind, those 5 steady words, "We are holding our own." It was impossible to believe that the massive freighter, a steel titan of the Great Lakes, could have simply vanished. Yet every radar sweep came back empty, and every desperate hail across the radio brought only the hiss of static, a race against time. As the minutes ticked by, Cooper made the call to the United States Coast Guard. His voice, calm but urgent, reported that the Fitzgerald was no longer visible on radar, and that all radio contact had been lost. The storm made the conversation crackle with interference, but the message was unmistakable. A 729-foot freighter and her crew of 29 men might be sinking, or already gone. The Coast Guard responded with cautious concern. They were already dealing with multiple distress calls across the lake, but the magnitude of this report could not be ignored. Whitefish Point Station began assembling a search plan, even as gale force winds and snow squalls battered their own operations. Time, however, was the enemy. If the Fitzgerald had gone down, survival in the frigid waters of Lake Superior would be measured in minutes, not hours. The Andersons' dilemma. The Coast Guard quickly asked a difficult question. Could the Arthur M. Anderson turn around and begin a search in the very waters that had just swallowed the Fitzgerald? Captain Cooper hesitated. His own ship was barely holding its own against waves that towered like small buildings. The Andersons' crew was exhausted, their vessel battered by hours of relentless punishment. To turn back into the heart of the storm was to gamble with their own lives. But the unwritten code of the Great Lakes is ironclad. Sailors help sailors. Without a word of protest, Cooper gave the order. The Anderson swung about, her engines straining as she re-entered the maelstrom. Men braced themselves as the ship groaned against the wind, every deck plate trembling under the onslaught of 30-foot waves. The frantic search. The Anderson began sweeping the area where the Fitzgerald had last been seen. Visibility was almost zero. Snow lashed the ship like shards of glass, and the radar screen glowed with nothing but the shifting chaos of the storm. Crewmen scanned the dark waters with spotlights, searching for any sign of life. Lifeboats, wreckage, even a single flare. Hours passed with no sign of the lost freighter. The men aboard the Anderson struggled against exhaustion, their eyes straining against the black void. Each wave that slammed the hull was a brutal reminder of what the Fitzgerald's crew must have faced in their final moments. Some of the Anderson's sailors whispered quiet prayers. Others remained silent, their thoughts fixed on the men who were almost certainly gone. Coast Guard joins the hunt. By 10 p.m., Coast Guard cutters and rescue helicopters began moving toward the last known position of the Fitzgerald. But even these specialized craft struggled to make headway. Winds screamed at more than 60 knots, and the snow squalls were so thick that pilots could barely see their own wingtips. The cutters plowed through the dark waves, their crews scanning the lake for debris. The radio channels buzzed with updates and tense speculation. Everyone involved in the search knew the odds were terrible. Even if someone had survived the sinking, the water temperature was barely above freezing. Without proper gear, a man could lose consciousness in under 15 minutes. The first discovery. Sometime after midnight, the searchers finally found what they dreaded most. Floating on the heaving waves was a solitary lifeboat, torn from its davits and battered almost beyond recognition. The boat was empty. Nearby, another lifeboat drifted aimlessly, also empty. The frigid waters offered no other clues. No survivors, no bodies, no desperate signals. The Andersons' crew stared at the lifeboat through the darkness, their hearts sinking with the realization of what it meant. The Fitzgerald had gone down fast. So fast, in fact, that her crew likely never had the chance to deploy the lifeboats. Whatever had struck the great freighter had been sudden, merciless, and final. Silence over the lake. As dawn approached on November 11th, the storm began to weaken. The screaming winds settled to a bitter howl, and the snow squalls thinned into gray mist. In the pale morning light, the full emptiness of Lake Superior became horrifyingly clear. The Fitzgerald was gone, leaving behind only scattered debris and the unanswered question of how such a massive modern ship could disappear without a single distress call. Rescue teams continued their efforts throughout the day, combing the waters for any sign of the 29 men who had sailed aboard the Pride of the Great Lakes. But the lake gave up no survivors. It was as though the Fitzgerald and her crew had been erased from the world in a matter of minutes. An unshakable loss. For the families waiting on shore, the news arrived like a hammer blow. Wives, children, parents, and friends clung to radios, praying for a miracle that never came. The Coast Guard eventually confirmed what everyone feared. The SS Edmund Fitzgerald had been lost with all hands. Church bells tolled across small towns from Wisconsin to Ontario. Entire communities mourned, for the Great Lakes shipping world was a close-knit family. Everyone knew someone aboard. Everyone understood the dangers of the lakes, but no one could comprehend how a ship as mighty as the Fitzgerald had simply disappeared. The legend begins. In the days that followed, speculation ran rampant. Some blamed faulty hatch covers, others spoke of rogue waves, massive, unpredictable walls of water capable of swallowing even the largest ships. Investigators promised answers, but the storm had taken its secrets to a depth of over 500 feet, where the Fitzgerald rested in icy silence. The search for the truth would continue for years, but on that night, the focus was simple: honor the lost. Across the Great Lakes, flags flew at half-mast. Mariners paused before every voyage, remembering the men who had fought until the very last moment. The Witch of November had claimed her prize, and in doing so had created a legend that would echo for generations. For months after the Edmund Fitzgerald vanished beneath the furious waves of Lake Superior, the great ship remained a ghost. Families of the 29 lost sailors clung to hope for answers, while the shipping community demanded an explanation. How could a modern freighter, built to withstand the brutal conditions of the Great Lakes, simply disappear without a trace? The only certainty was that the lake itself held the truth, and it would not give it up easily. The wreck lay somewhere in the vast icy depths of Whitefish Bay, a region of water both feared and respected by mariners. At its deepest points, Lake Superior plunges to over 500 feet, a cold black wilderness where sunlight never reaches. Searching such an environment in the mid-1970s was a monumental task, requiring advanced sonar, deep-water submersibles, and crews willing to brave the lingering storms of November. The first attempts. Almost immediately after the storm subsided, the United States Coast Guard began using sonar to scan the suspected area of the sinking. Early sweeps produced nothing but static-like echoes. The lake's rough underwater terrain, filled with ridges, rock outcroppings, and layers of shifting silt, confused the primitive technology of the era. As winter tightened its grip, the surface froze and the search had to pause. Families of the crew were forced to endure an agonizing wait, knowing their loved ones lay somewhere beneath the ice. Newspapers across the Midwest ran headlines filled with speculation, while radio shows replayed the haunting final transmission. "We are holding our own." Each passing week only deepened the mystery. Sonar breakthrough. The breakthrough finally came in May 1976, 6 months after the sinking. Using side-scan sonar, then a relatively new technology, the Coast Guard and the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, detected an anomaly roughly 17 miles north-northwest of Whitefish Point, directly along the Fitzgerald's last known course. The sonar images revealed a massive, unmistakable shape resting on the lake bed. The object was far too large to be anything but the missing freighter. After months of painful uncertainty, the Edmund Fitzgerald had been found. But finding the wreck was only the beginning. To understand what had happened, investigators needed photographs, visual proof of the ship's condition. This would mean sending manned submersibles into the icy darkness of Lake Superior's depths, an operation as dangerous as it was groundbreaking. Descent into darkness. Later that summer, the U.S. Navy dispatched a team equipped with the Curvy 3, a deep-sea, remotely operated vehicle capable of diving to depths greater than 1,500 feet. Piloted by a team on the surface, the Curvy 3 descended slowly into the black waters, its cameras and lights cutting through the eternal night. When the first images flickered onto the monitor aboard the research ship, the room fell silent. There, lying upright on the bottom of Lake Superior, was the shattered hull of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The great freighter, once the pride of the Great Lakes, now rested in two massive pieces, her bow section upright and intact, her stern twisted and broken. Investigators were struck by the eerie clarity of the scene. The cold, fresh water of Lake Superior preserved the wreck almost perfectly. The Fitzgerald's name was still visible on her bow, letters standing out like a silent epitaph. Deck machinery, railings, and even paintwork appeared as though the ship had been placed there only yesterday, not buried for months. Two pieces, many questions. The sonar and photographic evidence revealed that the ship had split in two. The bow section, nearly 300 feet long, stood upright on the lake bed, partially buried in silt. The stern, over 250 feet away, lay upside down, a mangled tangle of steel and machinery. Between the two sections were scattered pieces of debris, lifeboats, twisted beams, and fragments of cargo. But the images raised more questions than they answered. How had a vessel designed to withstand the worst the lakes could deliver broken apart so violently? The hatch covers showed signs of stress, but not the catastrophic failure some had predicted. The cargo holds were mostly intact, and there was no obvious evidence of an explosion or fire. The Fitzgerald seemed to have simply been overpowered by the sheer force of the storm. Theories take shape. Investigators debated the possible causes. Some believed that rogue waves, massive, unpredictable walls of water sometimes called Three Sisters, may have struck the ship in rapid succession, overwhelming its hatch covers and flooding the holds. Others suspected that the Fitzgerald's structural integrity had been weakened over years of hard service, leaving it vulnerable to a sudden break. Another theory focused on the cargo hatch clamps, which may have failed, allowing water to pour into the holds faster than the pumps could handle. This would explain the sudden list reported by the crew and the lack of a distress call. If the ship flooded rapidly, there would have been no time to react. Each theory carried weight, but none could be proven definitively. The lake, as always, guarded its secrets. A sacred site. As more expeditions visited the wreck, the discovery of the crew's resting place weighed heavily on those involved. Divers reported seeing personal effects, tools, and even unopened life jackets lying undisturbed around the wreckage. Though the cold water preserved the ship, it also preserved the tragedy. Out of respect for the 29 men who perished, the families requested and eventually secured legal protection for the site. In 1976, Canada and the United States designated the wreck as a gravesite, making unauthorized dives illegal. The decision ensured that the Edmund Fitzgerald would remain untouched, a memorial beneath the waves. The Bell recovery years later, in 1995, one final expedition brought closure for many families. Divers, with full permission, recovered the ship's bell from the wreck. Polished and engraved with the names of the lost crew, the bell now rests in the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point. Each year on the anniversary of the sinking, the bell is tolled 29 times, once for every life lost to the storm. The ghost of the Fitzgerald today, the Edmund. Fitzgerald lies silent on the lake bed, her steel hull slowly surrendering to time. Sonar images still show her broken body, a testament to the unstoppable power of nature and the limits of human engineering. Mariners passing through Whitefish Bay often pause to honor her memory, knowing that the lake beneath their hulls hides a story of courage, tragedy, and enduring mystery. The discovery of the wreck answered the question of where the Fitzgerald rested, but not the question of why she sank. That mystery, like the deep, dark waters of Lake Superior, remains unsolved. When the Edmund Fitzgerald was finally located on the floor of Lake Superior in 1976, the discovery brought some relief to grieving families, but it also opened a deeper mystery. The sonar scans and photographs provided haunting clarity of the ship's final resting place, yet they raised more questions than they answered. How could a massive steel freighter, 729 feet long and equipped with modern technology, break apart and sink in mere minutes without a single distress signal? For decades, experts, sailors, and scientists have wrestled with this puzzle. Investigations, both official and private, have produced multiple theories. Each offers a possible explanation, but none can fully unlock the truth that the cold depths of Lake Superior still keep hidden. The official investigation. The first comprehensive investigation was conducted by the United States Coast Guard, USCG, and the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. Teams of naval architects, maritime engineers, and weather specialists pored over the wreck images, crew reports, and radio transmissions. Their primary goal, to determine if the sinking was caused by human error, structural failure, or an overwhelming natural event. The Coast Guard's final report, released in 1977, concluded that the most likely cause was progressive flooding through faulty hatch covers. According to this theory, the giant waves of the November storm forced water over the deck, and once the cargo hatches began to leak, water quickly filled the holds. As the ship grew heavier, it rode lower in the water, allowing more waves to pour in, a deadly chain reaction. The report suggested that the Fitzgerald's hatch clamps and gaskets may have been inadequately maintained, allowing the 26-foot waves to batter the deck until the clamps failed. The vessel would have lost buoyancy rapidly, plunging to the bottom before the crew could send a distress call. But many mariners, especially Great Lakes captains, strongly disagreed with this conclusion. The rogue wave hypothesis. Veteran sailors pointed to the reports of rogue waves, sometimes called the Three Sisters. These are massive walls of water, often 30 to 35 feet high, that appear suddenly and travel in quick succession. The Fitzgerald's final radio messages described one of the worst seas ever seen, with winds over 60 knots and waves that could dwarf even the largest freighter. According to this theory, a series of rogue waves may have struck the Fitzgerald in rapid sequence, overwhelming the ship's ability to recover. A single wave could have forced the bow under, while a second and third wave pounded the hull before the crew could react. The tremendous force could have buckled the deck, sheared the hatch covers, or even caused the vessel to break in two mid-descent. Supporters of this theory note that the wreck's bow was found upright and buried deep in the lake bed as though it had driven downward with enormous speed, consistent with a catastrophic plunge caused by sudden flooding or structural failure. Structural weakness and metal fatigue. Another group of experts focused on the Fitzgerald's design and long service life. Built in 1958, the ship had spent nearly 2 decades hauling heavy iron ore pellets across the Great Lakes. Over time, the constant stress of loading and unloading may have weakened the hull. The wreck's photographs show a clean break between the bow and stern, leading some investigators to believe the ship may have snapped in half on the surface before sinking. If the Fitzgerald rode across the crest of 2 large waves while a third wave struck the middle of her hull, the enormous bending stress could have fractured the ship's spine. This hogging and sagging effect, where the bow and stern ride high while the center sags, has been documented in other shipwrecks. Some maritime engineers argue that this structural failure is the only way to explain the sudden, silent disappearance of such a large vessel. Bottoming out on the shoals. A fourth theory suggests the Fitzgerald may have struck an uncharted shoal in the shallow waters near Caribou Island earlier in the storm. Captain Ernest McSorley had radioed concerns about taking on water and a pipe to bad list shortly before the sinking. Some experts believe that if the ship scraped bottom, It could have damaged the hull or loosened hatch covers, allowing water to enter at a faster rate. However, no definitive evidence of a grounding has ever been found. The ship's last known course would have required an error in navigation to bring it dangerously close to these shoals. Still, in the chaos of a violent storm, such a possibility cannot be completely ruled out. Crew and communication factors. While mechanical failure and weather dominated most theories, investigators also examined human factors. Captain McSorley was a highly experienced Great Lakes skipper, but the storm was one of the most powerful on record. High winds, blinding snow, and malfunctioning radar left the Fitzgerald virtually blind in the final hours. The ship's final transmission, "We are holding our own," suggested that the crew was still fighting to stay afloat, but did not yet realize the full extent of the danger. The absence of a distress call indicates that the end came far more quickly than anyone anticipated, leaving no time for organized evacuation. Debates and disagreements. The Coast Guard's official conclusion, faulty hatch covers and flooding, was not universally accepted. Many Great Lakes sailors maintained that the Fitzgerald's hatch covers were inspected regularly and would not have failed so easily. Canadian investigators, conducting their own parallel inquiry, leaned more toward the structural failure theory. In the years since, private expeditions, underwater photography, and computer modeling have all added pieces to the puzzle. Yet no single explanation satisfies everyone. Each theory carries its own evidence, but also its own unanswered questions. The human element. Behind every hypothesis are the 29 men who lost their lives. Engineers can debate rivets and wave heights, but families remember fathers, brothers, and sons who vanished without a trace. The mystery of why the Edmund Fitzgerald sank may never be fully solved, but the tragedy is a human story above all, a reminder of the risks faced by those who work the unforgiving waters of the Great Lakes. Legacy of the investigation. The sinking of the Fitzgerald prompted sweeping changes in Great Lakes shipping. Hatch cover standards were strengthened, ship inspections became more rigorous, and storm warning protocols were improved. Captains were given clearer authority to delay voyages in dangerous weather. While these changes could not bring back the lost crew, they stand as a lasting legacy of the disaster, a testament to lessons learned in the aftermath of tragedy. The investigations may have provided theories, but Lake Superior keeps its final secret. Whether it was rogue waves, structural weakness, or a deadly combination of forces, the true cause of the Edmund Fitzgerald's sinking remains one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in North America. The loss of the Edmund Fitzgerald on that freezing night in November 1975 left more than a physical scar on the waters of Lake Superior. It etched a permanent place in the cultural memory of the Great Lakes and beyond. Though the wreck lay hidden nearly 530 feet beneath the surface, its story rose to the surface of public consciousness, capturing the imagination of artists, songwriters, sailors, and everyday people around the world. This was not merely a maritime tragedy, it became a haunting symbol of the power of nature and the vulnerability of human ambition. Immediate aftermath. In the days following the disaster, newspapers across the United States and Canada carried headlines of shock and disbelief. The Fitzgerald was not an obscure freighter. It was one of the largest and most famous ships operating on the Great Lakes. Families of the crew gathered anxiously along the shorelines, clinging to the hope that someone might be found alive. When the Coast Guard confirmed that all 29 men were lost, grief gave way to a collective mourning. The names of the crew members were read in churches and town halls from Minnesota to Ontario. Memorial services were held in Duluth, Sault Ste. Marie, and Detroit. Bells tolled in harbors across the region, each strike honoring a life cut short. The power of Gordon Lightfoot's ballad. Perhaps the most enduring tribute to the Fitzgerald came from Canadian singer-songwriter Gordon Lightfoot. Just weeks after the tragedy, Lightfoot released the haunting ballad The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. With poetic lyrics and a somber melody, the song recounted the storm, the mystery, and the loss in a way that resonated far beyond the Great Lakes. Lines like, "The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down, of the big lake they call Gitche Gumee," brought the Ojibwe name for Lake Superior into homes and hearts around the world. The song climbed the charts in both Canada and the United States, becoming an international hit. More importantly, it ensured that the story of the Fitzgerald would never be forgotten. For many people who had never seen the Great Lakes, Lightfoot's ballad was their introduction to the ship, the crew, and the raw fury of a superior storm. Annual memorials. To this day, the tragedy is honored every November. At the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum at Whitefish Point, Michigan, a solemn bell-ringing ceremony is held each year on the anniversary of the sinking. The original bell from the Fitzgerald, retrieved during a 1995 dive, is rung 29 times, once for each crew member lost, and a 30th time for all who have perished on the Great Lakes. Families of the crew often attend, sharing memories of loved ones and finding comfort in the enduring respect shown by strangers. Churches across the region hold similar services, and lighthouses are illuminated in tribute to those who never returned. Museums and exhibits. The Fitzgerald's legacy lives on in museums where artifacts and stories continue to educate and move visitors. The Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum displays the recovered bell, polished to a brilliant shine and housed in a place of honor. Nearby exhibits feature recovered deck equipment, photographs of the ship, and personal items from the crew. In Duluth, Minnesota, the Lake Superior Maritime Visitor Center tells the story of the Fitzgerald through interactive displays, models, and film footage of the wreck. These exhibits are not mere curiosities. They are carefully curated spaces of remembrance, ensuring that each visitor understands both the technological marvel of the ship and the human cost of its loss. Influence on maritime safety. Beyond songs and memorials, the sinking of the Fitzgerald brought lasting changes to Great Lakes shipping practices. The disaster exposed weaknesses in ship inspection protocols, weather forecasting, and communication systems. In the years that followed, regulations for hatch covers, loading procedures, and storm reporting were tightened. Ship captains were given clearer authority to delay or reroute voyages in extreme weather, and advances in satellite forecasting provided more accurate warnings for future storms. While these reforms could not undo the tragedy, they undoubtedly saved lives in the decades that followed. Pop culture and literature. The Fitzgerald continues to inspire books, documentaries, and films. Countless authors have examined the mystery from every angle: engineering, meteorology, human psychology, each adding a new layer to the ship's legend. Television specials and underwater explorations on networks like National Geographic and the Discovery Channel have brought dramatic visuals of the wreck to global audiences. For many writers and filmmakers, the story of the Fitzgerald is not just about a shipwreck. It is about the eternal struggle between man and nature. The cold, unforgiving depths of Lake Superior serve as a metaphor for the unknown forces that can overwhelm even the most prepared. Local identity and pride. For communities along the Great Lakes, the Edmund Fitzgerald is more than history. It is part of their identity. Cities like Duluth, Superior, and Whitefish Point carry a quiet pride in honoring the memory of the crew. The wreck is a reminder of the hardworking sailors who keep the region's economy alive, braving treacherous waters to move iron, coal, and grain through America's industrial heartland. Many locals feel a personal connection to the Fitzgerald, whether through relatives who worked on the lakes or through the shared understanding of living with Superior's unpredictable moods. An enduring mystery. Part of the Fitzgerald's cultural power lies in the fact that its true cause remains unsolved. Theories abound: rogue waves, structural failure, flooding through faulty hatches, but no explanation has ever been universally accepted. This lingering uncertainty fuels ongoing fascination. The Great Lakes have claimed over 6,000 ships and 30,000 lives, but few wrecks capture the imagination like the Fitzgerald. Each new dive, each new technological advance offers the possibility of answers, yet Lake Superior keeps her secrets. A legend that lives on. Nearly 5 decades after the sinking, the name Edmund Fitzgerald still carries a chill. Children learn the story in schools. Sailors recite it as a cautionary tale before each shipping season. Tourists visiting Whitefish Point feel the cold wind coming off the lake and imagine the final desperate moments of the crew. The legend of the Fitzgerald is not one of simple tragedy. It is a story of human courage, of nature's unstoppable force, and of the way memory preserves those we have lost. Whether through a haunting song, a polished ship's bell, or the quiet prayers of families who still watch the horizon, the Fitzgerald sails on in the collective heart of the Great Lakes. Nearly half a century has passed since the Edmund Fitzgerald vanished beneath the icy waters of Lake Superior, yet its story refuses to fade. From the polished bell at Whitefish Point to the echo of Gordon Lightfoot's haunting ballad, the Fitzgerald remains far more than a shipwreck. It is a timeless warning about the delicate balance between human ambition and the forces of nature. As we look back today, the tragedy offers lessons that stretch far beyond the Great Lakes, reminding us of the courage of those who sail and the humility demanded by the natural world. Respect for nature's power. The Fitzgerald was a technological marvel of its era, 729 feet long, powered by massive engines equipped with radar and radio communication. To those who worked aboard her, she was a floating fortress, capable of withstanding anything the Great Lakes could unleash. But on November 10, 1975, Lake Superior proved otherwise. The storm that night produced hurricane-force winds and waves higher than a three-story building. Despite every advancement in engineering, the lake reminded humanity that there is no such thing as an unsinkable ship. The first and most enduring lesson of the Fitzgerald is one of humility. No matter how advanced our tools, nature always holds the final word. The value of preparation. In the aftermath of the sinking, investigators uncovered gaps in safety procedures. Hatch covers were not designed to withstand such sustained pounding. Weather forecasts were less precise than today, and radar equipment could fail at critical moments. The loss of the Fitzgerald spurred significant reforms in shipping regulations, from stronger hatch standards to improved communication protocols. These changes saved lives, but they also underscore a universal truth. Preparedness is not optional when confronting powerful forces. Whether navigating a storm or running a business, the cost of complacency can be catastrophic. Human courage and sacrifice. Behind every theory about hatch covers or rogue waves are the 29 men who lived and worked aboard the Fitzgerald. They were experienced sailors, fathers, brothers, sons, who chose a dangerous profession to support their families and keep the Great Lakes economy moving. Their courage in the face of brutal conditions is a testament to the quiet heroism of working people whose labor often goes unnoticed. The fact that Captain Ernest McSorley and his crew fought to hold their own, as he said in his final transmission, speaks to their determination. They continued to battle the storm until the very end, embodying a spirit of perseverance that still inspires mariners today. The power of memory and story. Part of what keeps the Fitzgerald alive in the public imagination is the way its story has been told. From Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald to countless books, documentaries, and museum exhibits, each retelling keeps the memory of the crew alive. These stories transform tragedy into legacy, ensuring that the lessons learned are never forgotten. Every November 10th, bells toll across Great Lakes communities. Families gather at Whitefish Point to hear the ship's recovered bell ring 29 solemn times, one for each life lost. These memorials are not just ceremonies. They are acts of collective remembrance that give meaning to loss. The allure of unanswered questions. Despite decades of investigation, the true cause of the Fitzgerald's sinking remains a mystery. Was it rogue waves, structural weakness, a sudden flood through the hatches? The lake has never revealed her secret. This uncertainty fuels ongoing fascination, drawing divers, historians, and curious minds back to the story year after year. Mystery has a way of deepening meaning. The Fitzgerald reminds us that not all questions can be answered, and that some truths remain beyond human reach. In an age obsessed with certainty, the unresolved fate of the Fitzgerald teaches patience and respect for the unknown. A broader metaphor. The story of the Fitzgerald can be seen as a metaphor for human ambition. We build machines, chart courses, and predict storms, believing that we can master the elements. But the Great Lakes, like the oceans and the skies, resist full control. The Fitzgerald's demise echoes other historical warnings. The Titanic in 1912, the Challenger in 1986, and countless smaller tragedies where human confidence collided with natural forces. These events remind us to balance progress with humility. Technology can reduce risk, but it cannot eliminate it. The men of the Fitzgerald understood this, and their story urges us to do the same. The enduring legacy today, the Edmund Fitzgerald lies silent on the lakebed, her bow and stern separated by a debris field, but still remarkably preserved in the cold, dark waters. The site is protected as a grave, closed to recreational divers out of respect for the crew. Scientists occasionally visit to monitor the wreck's condition, but most of the time she rests undisturbed, a steel monument to those who perished. Above the surface, her legacy continues in safer ships, improved weather forecasting, and a stronger culture of maritime safety. Each vessel that sails the Great Lakes carries not just cargo, but also the lessons paid for by the Fitzgerald and her crew. Closing reflections. Standing on the windy shores of Lake Superior, it is easy to feel the same chill that once gripped the crew. The lake stretches to the horizon, deceptively calm on some days, violent and unforgiving on others. The Edmund Fitzgerald-esque story lingers in that shifting water, a reminder that behind every calm surface lies the possibility of sudden chaos. As long as ships cross these waters, the legend will endure. The Fitzgerald is not only a tragedy, but also a teacher, offering wisdom about respect, preparation, and the limits of human power. Each November, when the bell tolls at Whitefish Point, the echoes carry across the Great Lakes and into the hearts of all who hear them. The Edmund Fitzgerald may have vanished beneath the waves, but her story continues to rise above them, a permanent caution, a memorial to courage, and a reminder that even the greatest ships must bow to the untamed forces of nature.